And it looks like we're ready to call the roll.
Representative Clifford,
Here.
Connolly,
Here.
Flitner,
Here.
Hallinan,
Here.
Ottman,
Here.
Martinez,
Here.
Stivar,
Present.
Wharf.
Here.
Madam Chairwoman,
Here.
9 present, Madam Chair.
Very good. All right, this morning, committee, welcome to those out there in, I shouldn't say TV land, that just doesn't sound quite right. We are this morning, welcome to the House Labor, Health and Social Services Committee. We are considering House Bill 249, Railroad Safety. And Representative Clifford, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 249. This bill is about safety. The safety of many Wyomingites who work in the cab of a locomotive, but it's also about the safety of yours, mine, our communities, and our state. Similar legislation like this has passed in 7 states, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Washington, Illinois, Nevada, Colorado, and California, premised on health and safety. This bill creates a new section 37-9-506, railroad train crews, starting on line 13 through to line 15 and continuing on to page 2, line 1 through 3, subsection A says that no train shall operate in this state without at least 2 individuals. This is crucial because jobs entail working with hazardous materials every day. These workers may transport nuclear fuel one day, or radioactive materials another, or rockets and bombs on military trains on another day. On line 5, subsection B, this bill imposes a misdemeanor and fine for any railroad company, corporation, or employer who willfully violates subsection A. You'll see there, a first offense could range from not less than 250 and not more than 1,000. A second offense committed within 3 years, a fine that ranges from not less than 1,000 and not more than 5,000. For a third offense committed within 3 years, a fine that ranges from not less than 5,000 and not more than 10,000. On line 22, the section shall not apply to any employer who allows any person, as stated on page 3, lines 2 through 6, to move locomotives unattached to rail cars within a rail yard, or to operate a helper service that temporarily assists a train that requires more power. Subsection D defines a light engine, and a light engine means a locomotive that has no cabs attached. If this legislation should pass, the effective date would be July 1, 2021. There are several Wyoming communities who currently rely on railroads for business, but there are also other Wyoming towns who want to attract viable business prospects who need railroad access, which would have the potential to offer diversification and ultimately bring jobs to Wyoming, which is a good thing. That is the bill, and I will stand for any questions.
Super. Questions for Representative Clifford? Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Clifford, wasn't this a law previously? When did this come about that it was down to 1?
Representative Clifford.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, Representative Hallinan.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe that it used to be that this was the case, that it required two people on the train. But that has changed in fairly recently. When did that change? And now it's only 1.
Madam Chairman, Representative Hallinan, thank you for that question. I am unaware if that was the law before, to my knowledge, but there are people willing to testify who may have an answer to that.
Okay, any more questions for Representative Clifford? Representative Romero Martinez.
More of a,
What?
Madam Chairman, more of a comment. I remember this issue coming up before transportation, decades before. I am a descendant, I grew up on the railroad. I'm a descendant, I guess, of a railroad worker here in Wyoming. And I guess my comment is that it's been ever since I could remember. First, they start with, let's take away the caboose. Then let's make it a one nomad, I don't know, robot crew. I don't know. You need men for those air brakes. Just a comment. And I don't know if this is new or whatever. I just know that it's come up before and I never really heard the resolution to respond to that
Thank you.
question.
More questions for Representative Clifford? No? Okay, well, thank you. Do we have any state agency people in the room or online? There are, I do have a list of people online, but I don't see any agency people online. Any workforce services or any one of the agencies? Or YDOT or anybody? Federal agency people, maybe? I'm not quite sure. Just checking. None. Okay, well then we will open it up to public comment. I think what I'll just do is kind of start with one in the room and one online and one just kind of work your way back and forth. So maybe we could just, start from the front of the room and work our way back, I guess. Sir, would you like to make any comments on this? Just come up and have a seat there. There's a button in the front of the little black microphone thing that you push to make the microphone go from red to green. You see? Oh, there,
There,
second.
it's
Oh,
green
there,
now.
good job.
Yes.
And if you'll just introduce yourself for the committee and we'd be glad to hear you.
For those of you who do not know me, you've all received emails from me in the past, Dick Merklin, here in the flesh. So you don't have to know what I look like. I was born and raised in Cheyenne, 1945. For those of you who want to know that, I'm 76 years old. I'm a fourth generation railroader. My father worked in the railroad, the shops here. My brother worked in the railroad, the shops here. I was a locomotive engineer for 28 of my 30 years with Union Pacific, operating out of North Platte, Nebraska, up to the coal mines or to South Morrill coal fields, and also here to Cheyenne the last 10 years of my career. My son works in Council Bluff Yards in Omaha for Union Pacific Railroad. I've also been a local chairman for 28 of those years with the UTU, which is known as SMART Union now. I was a vice general chairman for 2 terms, 4 years each. I was a secretary treasurer of the general committee for 1 term, and I was a delegate to the international for 24 years. I feel that I know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to blow smoke. All I'm asking for you people today is support this bill because it is needed. It is dangerous and unsafe to have one person on those trains, especially when they're running them 2 and 3 miles long, and there's talk now of extending that out to 4 or 5 miles long. There ain't a crossing in this state that won't be blocked. And if you have loved ones living on the opposite side of where there may be medical facilities with the track going between it, and you've got a train there for hours on end, and they need a first responder for whatever reason, house on fire, medical, they're not going to get it. They can't get around the train. With 2 people on the train, I came from Nebraska, but they have a law down there that you can't block a crossing for over 10 minutes at any one time. If you're going to be there for an extended period of time, the conductor, who's the second man on the crew, goes back and cuts that crossing by law. They're not going to be able to do that with these 2, 3, 4, 5 mile long trains. They need 2 people on the train. I'm here to tell you, PTC is not the save all for the Union Pacific Railroad. There are failures with PTC. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's positive train control. It's a computer satellite GPS operation. They've spent billions of dollars on implementing this now, albeit that the federal government told all the class one and most of the other railroads, get this PTC in place. But there are failures occurring. I know there's another witness that's going to testify today. He's a former Representative Stan Blake. He's going to talk to you probably about an incident with PTC failure in North Platte, or east of North Platte on March 1st of this year. It crashed a train right over on top of a maintenance way crew that had equipment on the rail. And it got that equipment. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
Mr. Murtha, if I could just make sure to, if you could make sure those of us who are not railroad types speak specifically to the two-person issue.
I am. I will.
Well, right,
Okay.
just to make sure that we understand.
Well, if I could give you a little history with regards to Representative Hallinan's comments with regards to when did this all come about? May I do that?
Yep. We just,
Being a local chairman, I was privy to several pieces of information that came my way by virtue of my job as a union representative back in 1985. That's when Crew Consist came into play. That was a negotiated settlement. It's called the Halloween Agreement of October 1985. That's where they started reducing employees on the train. They got rid of the caboose. They went to a brakeman only. They got rid of that brakeman. Now they're after the conductor. They get the conductor, and I'm telling you, if this bill does not pass, the conductor is going to be a figment of everyone's imagination. There won't be one. And after that, they are going to go to 0 people on board. Total control. Total control by a computer, AI. The conductor is the person that is responsible for the train. The engineer is responsible for the locomotive consist. The conductor is responsible for communications with the dispatching center. For Union Pacific, that's in the Harriman Center in Omaha, Nebraska. They control the entire company, all trackage out of Omaha, one place. The railroad has various forms that they use for the movement, safe movement of trains across their line of road. When they call it train crew, the conductor's on the left side of the unit, the engineer's, of course, on the right. He's got all the computers. If the dispatcher wants them to copy a form, A, B, C, whatever track movement form that they need to have, the engineer has got to take his eyes off the track ahead and go hunting for that form in the computer. Once he gets that form, then the conductor is the one responsible for writing out the instructions that he's receiving from the dispatcher. When the engineer has to look away from the track ahead, it's not exactly a safe situation. The conductor is the one that's looking at the track ahead while the engineer is looking for the doggone form that's in the computer, providing the computer's working properly. There are 2 sets of eyes in that cab is the safest thing that you can have. And 2 brains are a lot safer than any computer. Anything that is electronic, a manager for the railroad told me many years ago, anything that is an electronic piece of equipment is bound to fail at some point in time. It's not 100%. It's not fail-safe. When you're playing with people's lives, that of the employees and the general public, you want as many eyes in that cab as you can possibly get. Used to be 3 and then down to 2, 1. And I tell you, as well as I'm sitting here today, they're looking at 0 in that cab. Now, with regard to PTC, if I may, Madam Chairman,
Mr. And you may, but let me just, so I've counted up the people in the audience and online. There's about 15. And so I just want to make sure everyone should be able to have 5 minutes of discussion that will use up our entire committee time. And we obviously will maybe want to have questions too. So
Okay.
just keep that timing into consideration. Thank you.
I'll try and make it as brief as possible. PTC cannot see a school bus on the tracks. It can't see an 18-wheeler on the tracks. It can't see someone sitting in a car that wants to commit suicide by train on the tracks. That happened in 2005 in California. A guy was going to commit suicide. At the last second, he decided to get off and get out of the way. The train ran into the car and it derailed into an opposing passenger train, killing 11 people. PTC can't see. It can't see behind you, the train. That's what the conductor's for, two-man crew. He gets up every time you go around a curve. They come and they look behind or go around the other way. They look back. I even had conductors that had binoculars. They were looking back there. They can't see the back end of a 2 or 3 mile train, granted, but it's still a safety factor. They can't see, a PTC cannot see shifted loads. A conductor can, as well as the engineer.
I guess they're lining up already, Mr. Murtha.
Okay, I'm
You,
sorry.
you,
Sorry.
you got 3 minutes more. Go right
Okay,
ahead.
okay. The
But-
conductor and the engineer, they look out for each other. If there's a medical emergency with one of those on that crew, the other one's there to stand in. 95% of all crews on trains are cross-trained. In other words, the conductor can be an engineer can be a conductor. The reason that these vehicles, school buses, 18-wheelers, cars can't be seen is because they can't shunt the rail. In other words, electrical interference there that'll throw a block in front of the train or stop it in the case of PTC. All I ask you for is your support for this bill. I know there are some who voted against this bill last year. I implore you to please pass this bill because it's the right thing to do, because I guarantee you they go to 1, it's just around the corner before it's 0. And you don't want that. If you go to Nebraska, you'll see several of the towns, the further east you go towards Omaha, they all have brand new overpasses. All these small towns. You know why? Trains won't hit anything then. They've spent millions of dollars. Union Pacific has the biggest share of that, but the counties and cities have to pick up that tab, and the cost for a overpass is around $8 to $10 million. You don't have that in your budgets. None of the counties do. None of the cities do.
True thing. Let's take questions for Mr. Murtha. I didn't see any. Actually, I do have one because it sounded like you had some good history in the back. So you mentioned that the 1985 agreement to reduce the employees and take off the caboose and stuff was a negotiated agreement. So I guess my question is the role of the union in this discussion. I mean, it sounded like it was previously result of a labor negotiation with the employer as far as the caboose and that sort of thing. Is this not something that has potential for negotiation with the union and the employers?
No, the railroad wants one and then none. This is why it's so very important that the bill pass this time. We need to get more states.
So in other words, I mean, in other words, the negotiations have failed, is what you're saying.
Yeah. and
So
then
you're
they
turning
just
to this.
They'll go to an arbitrator, and an arbitrator will side with the carrier because the carrier has very deep pockets and they love to give the money to people that support their causes.
Very good. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Ottman. And while she gets her, I'm not like disappearing. It's just my clock up here is failing. So I'm going to get my telephone. That's just what I'm doing here. I'm not ducking away. Go ahead, Representative Ottman.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Merkel, I was just wondering, you said they're going to go to one, so currently the situation is where they do have two? Is that what you were saying, or did I misunderstand?
On most lines of road, Class 1 railroads, they do have the majority of two-man crews, but there are certain operations that they're using one-man crews on at current time. And if there's no agreement possibly being made with the union, they're doing it arbitrarily.
Okay, very good. No more. Let's remember we've got another 14 more folks. Very good. Thanks very much for what you're doing for us. Appreciate your work. I'm gonna take somebody off the online. Donna, is there anyone in particular has their hand up? Otherwise, I'll just start from the top of my list.
I have a Mr. Charles Randolph. I also have former Representative Stan Blake.
Oh, yes, we should definitely have former Representative Blake first. Bring him in. Whoa.
Hey,
You've redone yourself. Welcome, Representative Blake. I'm
Matt-
just warning you at the beginning because we miss you and we'd love to talk for hours, except that if I give everybody time, everybody gets 5 minutes. So, and then we'll be done.
I totally understand, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, it is an honor to be before your committee and committee members. It's great to be here. And I'll be brief. I have an opening statement. I hope to answer any questions I can. There's the old saying that two heads are better than one. Railroaders live this life every time they step on and off a locomotive. The ability of two people to work together safely and their collective experience helps them to react to unexpected and potentially dangerous situations as they happen, preserving and protecting the safety of the public and the crew. Why railroads continue to cling to this notion that removing a crew member will have no effect on the safe operations of railroads in America is absurd. They're fighting tooth and nail in court against keeping two people on the trains, and the few decisions recently have gone against the railroads and in support of the working railroaders. 9 states have passed a two-man crew laws or regulations. Public opinion and research have indicated that a reduction in crew size would add risk and danger to an industry that hauls hazardous and nuclear materials through our cities, towns, and rural areas alike. You'll probably sleep better at night not knowing what the railroads haul through Cheyenne, believe me. And I forgot, Madam Chairman, I forgot to mention, I'm Stan Blake. I'm representing, I'm the state director for the Sheet Metal Air Rail Transportation Union. And I just wanted to get that out there. My apologies, Madam Chairman. The railroads believe new technology can safely replace the human element on a train. Technology will never deliver first aid to the person whose vehicle has been struck by a train and is trapped and injured at a rail crossing. A conductor will. Technology will not perform CPR on the coworker who suffers a medical event while the train is moving. Technology will not physically assist a coworker in evacuating a locomotive when it has derailed into the Wind River in 2010. The crew had to help each other to get out of that locomotive or they would have drowned. Technology does not need to be approached with the final goal of slashing the workforce. So with rail carriers being profitable and safe and 2 on the crew, it looks like America's railroad workers must be doing something right. I'm a recovering politician, Madam Chairman, and I heard in testimony yesterday on the floor of the House, this is a quote, "I come down on the side of people, jobs, and paychecks. I will add safety to that." Right now, like I said, 9 states have passed a 2-man crew bill. And there are two people on most Class 1 railroads right now. And this only applies to Class 1 railroads, the UP and the BNSF. There are pending legislation is Iowa, Missouri, New Mexico, Michigan, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Nebraska, and I believe Utah. And a lot of those states have train length bills. Some of these trains are 3 miles long and longer. Why do we need 2 persons on a crew? On July 6, 2013, an unattended freight train carrying crude oil derailed in Quebec, killing 47 people because the one person on that crew had no help and he did not properly secure that train, killed 47 people in that town. Most of the 47 people had to be identified through dental records and DNA samples. Engineers and conductors each are responsible for a long list of unique duties, most of which must be carried out simultaneously for the same safe and efficient operation. And positive train control was forced on the railroads by the federal government. It is a safety tool. The unions applauded that. We need that. But it's not, doesn't open up the can of worms that, hey, we've got positive train control. We can get rid of a crew member. That's horrible. And Wyoming Representative Romero Martinez was exactly right. Wyoming passed a 2-man crew bill when Geringer was governor. At the 11th hour, the governor vetoed that bill. The legislature couldn't come back and try to override it. So it was a bill. It was passed by the House and the Senate. And I cannot remember the year, Madam Chairman. And positive train control is a great safety tool, but it has failures. Like Mr. Merkel said, there was a train in North Platte. The computer, the positive train control said, you are lined correctly. They just it's like kind of like almost like cruise control. They put it in gear, they started rolling, they look up, they're lined right on top of working men and equipment on the same track. And I have that document. And one more thing, 85% of respondents of a survey done for 4 years across all kinds of states, Nebraska was one, Alabama was one, 85% of respondents favored legislation requiring 2-person crews. And yeah, this is can be a labor negotiation, but doesn't mean the state can't have a 2-person crew bill. No matter what the unions and the railroads come up with, it is imperative that the state of Wyoming protect its citizens. And I go back, I think I'll close it right there, let other people talk, and I answer any questions.
Perfect timing. And I'm glad to hear it's possible to be a recovering politician. We should all aspire to that someday. Questions for Mr. Blake? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Stan, it's so good to see you, and you're furry. My question is, what happens with a derailment? As you know, I live in Laramie. I see trains going north and south as well as east and west. And I swear at least once a year, I see some kind of derailment. What happened? What do crew members do in that circumstance?
Mr. Blake.
Madam Chairman, Representative Connolly, when a derailment happens, we're trained. I'm a trained conductor. I'm not an engineer. We're trained by the Union Pacific. If it has hazardous material, we grab the shipping papers that have all the hazmat documents on it, and we coordinate with first responders, firemen, medics, emergency management people, the engineers contacting the dispatch to find out what's going on. And trains run through Laramie at 40 miles an hour. And that's a scary situation. But yeah, we're trained to take our hazmat documents, assess the situation, what's going on, were there any injuries? Was there a chemical release of hazardous materials? Which way the wind's blowing so you can start running and let people know. But the conductor is very important in a derailment for sure. Thank you.
More questions for Mr. Blake? Okay, thank you so much. So glad to see you guys.
Thank you. I'll stay online just in case.
Yep, audience and those online, just to keep, doing the math, we're we're falling behind already. So I may just start banging, and I really kind of hate to do that because obviously everybody wants to say something, but I would really hate to run out of time and not finish the bill. So Tammy, introduce yourself for the committee, if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I apologize for jumping to the front. I have 2 other bills running in 2 other rooms, so I'm going to jet out of here. What I wanted to address today.
Just introduce yourself for the sake
I'm
of the
sorry, I'm
committee.
Tammy Johnson with Wyoming State AFL-CIO. And we represent all of the railroad workers in the state that are affiliated with the union. So what Mr. Blake said is spot on. I wanted to address just a little bit what you asked about the negotiated agreement piece. In a true bargaining scenario or environment, that would be a possibility. But in 1981, when President Ronald Reagan changed the rules around federally supported transportation, such as you remember the air traffic controller strike, they also applied that to railroads. So railroad workers no longer have the ability to use a strike as a bargaining tool. So not that they would want to, they're very committed to their jobs, but that colors the negotiation process. So it's no longer a true negotiating agreement process. Things like safety should never be on the table for bargaining. I think almost all of you on this committee have railroads that run through your town. Our state is largely dependent on that. The growth of our state came about because of railroads. So I don't think any of us can say we wouldn't care about the safety of our community when it comes to a railroad. That's really the critical issue here, is the safety of the people on the train as well as the safety of the communities. I wanted to put that forefront. The negotiated piece is certainly salaries, benefits, wages, all those things should be left to that negotiated contract. But the safety of our communities, I feel like, is this committee's responsibility and this legislature's responsibility. So when you vote yes for this, you're going to vote yes for safety. You're going to vote yes for the safety of the workers. You're also going to vote yes for about 600 jobs in this state that pay upwards of $100,000 a year. And think about that in your community. If you lost half the rail workers in your community, they're not coming back, they're not retooling, they're going to go somewhere else and work. And that's a lot of salaries walking out of the communities in this state. So I think it's very important. You've heard a lot this session about jobs, and I'm all for that. We want good jobs for the people who live and work here. The UP has continued to post record profits year after year after year. You can go out online and look at the little tiny dip for COVID, but they continue to go. And I just can't imagine why they would want to compromise the safety of our communities and our workers as well. And, money's always the bottom line, but in this case, I hope that this committee will see that safety is the bottom line.
Okay.
So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ms. Johnson?
No.
Representative Worf.
I have a question, Madam Chair. I'm assuming it's the brakeman conductors, the position that is probably the one that they're seeking to eliminate, which would mean you just have an engineer. Can you tell us, Madam Chair, kind of what the average, salary is of a brakeman conductor for the railroad companies? I mean, is that something you can kind of share with us? I have no idea what that would be, but I think it's important to understand what we're talking about, because I think this is an important issue. And I think clearly, if this bill does pass, it does affect negotiations. But I can tell you, I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut, but I would like to know that, just so we know kind of what we're talking about.
Ms.
Thank you.
Johnson?
Madam Chair, Representative Worf, thank you for the question. I cannot answer that, but I will be willing to bet Representative Blake could answer that. And I don't know if we can keep him around as an expert.
He
Maybe
seems to
some of
still
the
be here.
some of the people
He's not
behind
that
me
recovering.
may also be able to answer. So
Representative Romero Martinez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you for being here and for, answering all these tough questions and sharing information with us. First question is, and just a yes or no one, so that we're trying to keep the time down to a quick, when we talk about, when we talk about jobs, and we talk not just the second man crew, the caboose, the brakemen that were gone, and maybe they're gone now. Yes or no, do you think they should have those also?
Well, wait, I'm sorry, Representative Romero Martinez, for sake of time, we really need to focus on, the bill is specific to the two-man crew.
It's
I
just
don't,
the two, we're not talking about more.
I think we, right, I mean, it's not gonna add it no matter what we do.
Okay, well,
with
then
this
the
bill,
next
so.
question is due to the two deaths that happened recently outside of Cheyenne, and that one's valid, Madam Chair. Where did safety play a role in that in terms of the air brakes? What was the determination there?
Ms.
Madam-
Johnson, do you
Madam
know?
Chair, Representative Romero Martinez, I don't know the details of that, but I do know sometimes you'll hear statistics about that there haven't been any accidents that, or limited number of accidents, but what we don't know is the number of accidents that were prevented because of having two people on the train. When they spot a rock in the canyon and they can stop the train we don't have any data on that, but you will hear the railroads share stories about, well, we have such a low incident of accidents. I submit to you that that's because there are two-man crews, not without the crew.
Okay, any more questions for Ms. Johnson?
Just two more comments.
Okay, let me just point out here that we had 3 people in a half an hour. So instead of 5 minutes each, we're getting 10 minutes each, which means half the people aren't going to get to testify. Because
Madam Chair,
gonna
I'm certain
cut
the
it off.
people
Go.
behind me will give you a lot of information as well. So
Go ahead, Mr.
I could
Representative
probably keep
Romero
it down to a
Martinez.
minute, but each commercial is also taking away 30 seconds of my 1-minute fast speech when I start rapping like a fast rhymer. The comment, Madam Chair, that I want to make, I did reach out to your office in the last 2 years several times and I didn't get a call back. I've left messages. Thank you for being here, but we can talk more after this and I appreciate everything. And maybe if I'm out of order, I apologize, but it is my opinion that the Union Pacific Railroad is being predatory and heartless in regards to safety, and I conclude my comment.
Former Representative Blake, do you have any information on the salaries?
Am I still here? I guess. I do.
You
Like
can't really recover that well.
Like a starting conductor, they start at 75% of the wages, could possibly be $40,000 to $50,000, where a fully tenured locomotive engineer could possibly make over $100,000 a year. But and they're usually the highest paid member of the crew, the engineer is.
Okay, that gives us some idea. Thanks very much. More questions for Ms. Johnson? Nope. Okay.
Thank you,
Super.
Madam
Thanks.
Chair.
All right. Just because we've had sort of 3 folks in favor of the bill, is just to make sure that we don't run out of time. Is there anybody out in the audience who's opposed to the bill that would like to talk for a change? No? No, not necessarily. Doesn't necessarily tell you what you think it tells you. Welcome. If you'll introduce yourself for the committee, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's always one, isn't there?
We're always glad. That's what we're here for. Go ahead.
I'm two of company.
Just give us your name for us.
I'm Pat Joyce. I'm the Assistant Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. Thank you for holding this hearing this morning. I'll be brief, Madam Chairman. We represent 32 operating mines within the state of Wyoming, of course, and we represent trona, bentonite, coal, and uranium, and 3 of the 4 rely heavily on freight transportation, railroad freight transportation to get our goods out to the rest of the world. And so we have a good working relationship with the railroads and we rely on that. We want to make that clear today. We do oppose this bill this morning, mainly on the fact that we would like to keep the negotiations between the railroads and the unions and not have the state interfere. I have other comments, but I think that's my bottom line. And in the essence of time, I will leave it at that. The other thing that I do want to make clear is within the Wyoming Mining Association and the mining industry in Wyoming, Madam Chairman, safety is paramount. I mean, we don't start a meeting in the association, let alone in the mines, whether it's a shift change or whatever, there's always a safety share that's discussed. And so I put on a 2-day safety show every year, and it's a long 2 days, but the mines and the railroads put a lot of money into safety. And I think that's something we share in common. Our focus is to keep the negotiation between the mine, or not the mines, the railroads and the unions. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Chairman. Stand for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Joyce? Representative Worf?
Madam Chair, I guess the question I have is, do you think it's a fair process since the railroaders, the people that work for this industry, since they've lost that tool of having the ability to strike that was mentioned in prior testimony, do you think the government's already kind of put their finger on that scale? And that's a question I would just ask.
Ms. Joyce?
Madam Chairman, Representative Worf, that's hard. I, wasn't around when all of that decision was made at the government level. And I know that the unions do stand up mightily for their employees. And I would think that would have to go back to Representative Blake or former Representative Blake for a good answer on that. I probably wouldn't be the most qualified to answer that question, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Representative Connolly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Joyce, 30-3-104 is a statute that is in relation to mine safety, and it prohibits working alone. And I'm curious if you have had any problems with that element in our statutes where we have taken mine safety so seriously that we have put in statutes that individuals cannot work alone.
Ms. Joyce?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Connolly, the question being, do I think it is comparative or, because we do have that statute and that is a qualification within the mines that we don't allow anyone to work alone. So there's a comparison. Absolutely.
Great, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
What a good researcher. More questions for Ms.
I'm not
Joyce?
focusing on safety.
Oh, that's good. And you do, and that's super. Yep. Representative Ottman?
There we go. Ms. Joyce, Ms. Chairman, and Ms. Joyce, I'm not exactly sure if this question goes along particularly to the mining or where it would go, but my question to someone is, of course, we all want safety, and a train accident would be devastating. But with the push around our nation for artificial intelligence driving on the highways and the trucks and the big rigs and all of that, would this issue be more prone to be looking at that and those negotiations on whether that is really safe to head in that direction with these different forms of transportation and carrying, rather than eliminating or not eliminating people? Because if the railroads and different ones are going with the automatic driving and all of that, I can't remember the term, then actually one person would be there just to assist. So I'm just wondering how that plays in, because I know there is a gigantic push towards that. Thank you.
And of course, Ms. Joyce, working for the mines, might not be able to answer that question too well.
Madam Chairman and Representative Ottman, we do see in the industry and all the advancement in technology across not only our country, but other parts of the world. I think this is a precedence that is all connected, whether it's automotive, trucking, all the transportation fields, I think, are looking at this. When you look at cost comparisons, you look at safety comparisons, it's all got to balance out. And but we as the mines probably aren't the most articulate in that, as far as, we don't get involved in that. We rely on the railroad to transport our products, and we want that done as safely and efficiently as we can. So
Okay. More
I
questions?
didn't
from
give you a very good answer, but
Ms. Johnson?
That's fine.
Or Joyce, I mean. Okay, thanks very much.
Sure.
Let's take another person from yes, well, are you testifying separately, or are you there to help Ms. Joyce, or?
Madam Chairman, I'll wait my turn to testify. I believe you're going to go on.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
Okay.
no, I
I
see her.
appreciate that. Thank
I
you.
see her there. I just want to make sure that, I'm kind of drawing evenly from the various, we've heard some complaints through leadership that people online felt like they weren't being called upon. So
Madam
Donna,
Chair,
is there
I
anyone with
have-
their hand up?
I have 4 people in the Zoom waiting room with their hand up. I'll admit the first, Corey Runyon.
Send them in.
Sorry, Madam.
Hello, welcome.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. My name is Corey Runyon, and I am a locomotive engineer here in Cheyenne currently. I run from Cheyenne, Wyoming to North Platte, Nebraska. I am also a state legislative representative and chairman for the Wyoming State Legislative Board that represents the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. I have been a locomotive engineer for 20 years. I've worked on a railroad for 24 years, and I've been a conductor off and on for about 6 years at the beginning of my career. I did send you some documentation. I had one incident of a DP that was on fire at Evanston, Wyoming, or close to Evanston. I believe it was outside of town, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. They had the conductor drop off of the train, spot the DP up, and meet emergency personnel to put out that fire. That happened, I think, May 26th of 20.
If I can just interrupt, what's a DP?
That's of distributive power, and that is a slave locomotive that is run remotely from the lead locomotive. And they have those typically in these long trains. They'll have one in the middle and sometimes on the rear. So they might have A, B, and C consist. And talking about that, I can tell you that as an engineer, my duties have expanded, because now I'm not just looking at a screen that has my air brakes and my speed and those type of things. I also am looking at a screen with deep GPS that has given me the signals and things out 6 miles ahead. And then I also have another screen that will show the other locomotives and what they are doing in their air, and if they are coordinating or communicating with the head end. Now, as you can imagine, when I am looking at all of those screens, at times a dispatcher may call up and say, we have a slow order. They will transmit that slow order with a number tag and wordage that we have it, and it has the correct mileposts and everything. Now, to do that, I have to go into the screen, scroll through it, and click on it with a soft key to bring it up and look at it. So as you can imagine, when I am doing that, I'm not looking at the road or what's out in front of me. And I really rely on that conductor at that time to do that for me. And then once I bring that screen up, the conductor does the radio work to read it back to the dispatcher. And he also does the radio work to get it. The speed reduction or whatever we're looking at. So we coordinate together, and really, as you can imagine, we have no set schedule. Like, I work on a board, there's me and several other people, and then might have a double-ended pool from North Platte that are here in the hotel. They take us, every other person that's first out gets a train. Well, their train lineup, they will show a projection of future trains they think are coming in. Their projections aren't very good, so you never know when you're going to work. I can literally sometimes move up 12 hours. So, you could run around all day doing your errands, and then all of a sudden you think you're going to go to bed and get a nap, and you come home and figure out, wow, I'm going to work, and the phone rings. Now with these long trains, we are typically staying on duty 12 hours, 10 to 12 hours, sometimes longer. So it's very hard to stay awake, and you really rely on that other person for a job briefing. And they seem to have us doing more work now than we did before. So you can, it's not uncommon to work 10 hours and then all of a sudden you have to do some work at the other end and pick up some cars. And to follow the regulations and do the job right, you really rely on that other person in the cab to talk to them about the job that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Because when you get tired or fatigued, it's very easy to miss something very simple. I agree with what Representative Blake, former Representative Blake, and my friend from the other union said. I also agree with a lot of what Mr. Merkland said. I want to try and be brief, so I had sent out a statement with some of my facts. I had mentioned a crossing in Oshkosh that I was involved in, an incident on the Powder River Basin. We were already over a crossing, and a motorcycle rider was not stopping. She had to brake and slide her motorcycle into the post that held the crossing gates, flew into the air and landed about a foot or two to 3 feet maybe away from the rails. It was the only recourse she had. She would have slid under a loaded coal train and probably died. As you can imagine, when we got stopped, we were probably a mile or longer past the crossing. As a conductor, I had to run back there and separate the train so the EMTs could get to that lady. Now that's what we're talking about. We're talking about safety in the communities. The representative that you had that said, is this artificial intelligence? It is. I am babysitting it. Both of us are babysitting it and watching it, but we are sounding the alarm to tell you that it's not safe to go to a one person. My start of my career in 97, we were running 6,000 to 8,000 foot trains. A long train was 8,000 foot. Now we can run them 18,000 foot on the corridor here through Wyoming into North Platte, Nebraska. Soda ash trains, double stack trains. There are certain trains they are now running up to 18,000 foot. I have seen farmers, I was a farmer in the past. My family had a dry land wheat grain farm in Sunol, Nebraska by Sydney. I have seen farmers stopped at crossings with their grain trucks, waiting to get to the, during harvest, waiting to get to a silo to unload their grain. And they can't get past the crossing because the trains are so long now. We can cut that. They don't let us, but if a train breaks down and there's an emergency situation, we can make those cuts and do those kind of things. The other thing to remember is, even though we have all this great technology, it's still an 18th century train and brakes that are back there running air through them. And when it gets cold or mechanical failures and we have an emergency and it breaks down, or if you have a derailment, that conductor has to walk the train and goes to find out what's wrong with the train and why it broke down. A lot of times there are no roads. There's no way to get there with a vehicle. I know on the hill, on Sherman Hill, they have bad weather like this storm we're looking to get. There is no way other than maybe running a train up on a track next to them to get to those employees. And so when we break down, that conductor, the engineer, babysit the train and the brakes to make sure it doesn't move, has to go back and tie some handbrakes for additional safety measures, and then also look and see if there's a breakage, if he can fix it. And, Lord, if it's hazardous material tank or something else that has been punctured and there is a gas release, to warn authorities.
Okay, Mr. Redden, I'm just going to kind of interrupt there to make sure we maybe some people are going to fold up and go away, but I want to make sure to give them all.
I think I can add a little more, but I think I would just be going on and on. I will take questions and thank you very much.
Questions for Mr. Runyon. Representative Hallinan.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is, are there currently is there an engineer and a conductor on those trains that you ride on now?
Mr. Ryan?
Currently on class one railroads, we have two people in the cab. There are some short line railroads that maybe are using one person. I would like to tell you that Lee Magnique accident that Representative Blake was talking about, that was a one-man crew, and they parked the train on a grade because they could not cut a crossing because there was only one person, and the train ended up rolling back into town. So that, but yes, right now there are two people on the train.
Okay, more questions for Mr. Runyon? No? Okay, great. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, next person up, Ms. Delancey. Here you are. Thank you for waiting patiently up front. Go ahead.
Good
Introduce
morning.
yourself for the committee if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I don't often get to come see my friends in the Labor Health Committee, so it's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm with the Wyoming Business Alliance, and with our over 300 members, we stand in opposition to House Bill 249. Not because we don't believe in worker safety and the safety and security of Wyoming workers is not important. It's very important, but more on a philosophical principle level, that when you look at what this bill is attempting to this is a business, a labor, and employment bill being couched as a safety bill. So, and what I mean by that is when we start allowing the state to inject itself in private contracting, that sets a really bad precedent for business. There's really no room for three parties in a two-party contract. As was the testimony, currently there are 2 men or 2 women on the crews. There cannot be changes to this current status without the consent of the union. So really having this conversation year after year after year brings us back to that same, policy matter. Do we want the state of Wyoming to inject itself in private contracting between businesses and dictate the day-to-day operational decisions of our industries or not, is really what this bill comes down to. I provided a handout for you, and I encourage you to look at it because there's been a lot of discussion about safety, and the testimony has been absent to show that there is an increase in accidents as the crew size has decreased. That's just simply not what the facts are. So I know that this is a very emotional topic for people. I'm very supportive and sympathetic, and we really appreciate the work of our railroaders, especially during this past year, during the pandemic, to try to help stabilize supply chains. If it wasn't for those heroes on the front line keeping the toilet paper moving through freight and rail, we'd all be in an even more inconvenient situation than we have been. But it's really well established that railroad work rules are negotiated between private companies and the labor unions, and that's how it should be, not the state of Wyoming. This is unfortunately become a political issue. This is a bill brought to you by the unions, not the private business sector. And we just, think about too the testimony of states like California and Colorado passing legislation. Wyoming prides itself on being business friendly. And by, again, the state injecting itself into these very technical, long history of law really isn't a place for the state of Wyoming, in our opinion, to be in. So for those reasons, and I just wanted to come back and touch on Representative Conley's observation about 30-3104 as far as the codification of the current practice in the mines. Again, that statute just codifies the practice that's already happening. This would be the same type of situation. This is the current practice. There can't be any changes without a mutual agreement between the union members and the railroad to make any deviations from that. So passing a statute like this would just be duplicative in codifying already the business practices. And at the end of the day, accident and injuries are bad for business. No one wants to see their employees getting hurt and are not going to do anything that would put their employees' lives or well-being on the line. But at a time when we're all being asked to do more with less, balancing technology in as a mechanism of efficiencies to add additional layers of safety certainly seems to be something that other industries support. And the railroad seems to be no exception for that. You know, again, at the end of the day, if the state steps in and starts dictating those operational decisions and allocating resources for our private sector, those costs are going to be passed on to the industries that are directly impacted by the use of the railroad. So I just, again, ask you to check out the handout, stay focused on the facts as far as the safety record, and ask that you defeat House Bill 249 and preserve that, you know, freedom to contract.
Questions for Ms. Delancey? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Delancey, wouldn't you agree that we have lots and lots of statutes that are part of the agreements and negotiations between business and labor? I mean, not only the very specific one-person mining example that I gave, but that's just a portion of our whole mining safety statute. We forbid child labor. We don't allow triple trailers. I mean, there's lots that we do in our statutes that are part of those negotiations. Wouldn't you agree?
Ms. Delancey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Conley, certainly sprinkled throughout the statutes, there are those areas where the legislature, as a matter of policy, has stepped in and decided to codify current practices in business. But just because you can doesn't always mean you should.
More questions for Ms. Delancey? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
In committee, I will just say that more than one person so far who has testified is my constituent, so I listen to myself and all of my constituents. Okay, we have someone who's come forward here. We'll let Tim take his place, I guess, seeing as he's in, wait, I'm sorry, actually I wanted to, who's next on the, I got to remember to go back and forth. Donna, do we have another person online who wants to speak?
Madam Chair, I have 4 additional people on the Zoom wait list who haven't testified yet. I'll admit the first, Matt Jones.
Okay, Matt Jones. Mr. Jones, thank you. And let me just say, I'm going to have to start, I'm really going to try to keep a better eye on my phone time here. It says 9:03 on my phone, so in 5 minutes, I'm going to cut you off mid-syllable if necessary. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Madam Chair, that won't be necessary. I will keep my comments brief. Again, I'm Matt Jones with BNSF Railway Public Affairs. Sorry I can't be there in person today, and thank you for accommodating my testimony via Zoom. Before I get started with my comments, I do want to mention that I believe something was incorrectly stated earlier. Railroad unions do have the ability to strike. There is a very regimented process under the Railway Labor Act that has existed for nearly 100 years. There are many steps in the process, but it does preserve the right of self-help for the unions. And BNSF's Assistant Vice President for Labor Relations is also in the waiting room, and he can speak more directly to those provisions. But, you know, we've heard a lot of very important testimony today about safety and employees that are concerned about safety. And I just want you to know that we have a common goal with all of our employees to operate a railroad free of accidents and injuries. We're committed to the safety of our employees, also to the safety of our neighbors and the communities where we work and where our employees live. Railroads have dramatically improved safety over decades through a combination of investments, innovation, and very importantly, through the collective bargaining with labor to improve work rules. So BNSF strongly opposes this bill because it jeopardizes that record of success. House Bill 249 is frankly government overregulation that undermines its stated goal of railroad safety. The bill locks in place the status quo with the legislature telling business that there's no better way to run your operations. And I want to be very clear about this. BNSF can't operate trains with one person on a train unless two things happen. First, we have to negotiate an agreement with our employees to do so, meaning that we have to agree with our employees on that issue. And second, we would have to demonstrate to the Railroad Safety Agency that we can do it safely. If House Bill 249 becomes law, railroads won't be able to modernize our business operations, even if our employees and the safety regulator agree that there's a better and safer way. So this debate has been going on for decades. And, you know, as we see today, it often turns political. In the 80s, and we've heard prior testimony on this, railroad employees pushed state laws requiring trains to keep cabooses. Just like today, our employees went to legislatures arguing they needed the caboose and trainmen or brakemen who worked back in the caboose for safety. Before that, it was the firemen on the train. Railroads, just like all other businesses that want to survive, have steadily changed over the decades for the better. And from time to time, when someone worried they might lose their job, railroaders have gone to state legislatures saying that you should stop that change to promote public safety. The caboose has been gone now for more than 3 decades. In the 80s, train crews had 3 to 5 members. Since then, railroads have reduced the employee injury rates and train accidents by 80%. And we haul more than twice as much as we did back then. This bill requires 2 people in a locomotive at all times, even when there's no safety benefit. But the alternative isn't a 1-person crew on all trains. The issue is whether private business should have the ability to work with its employees to innovate and improve. We're not seeking to eliminate the conductor. And that's just frankly not what is happening. But we want to be able to work with our employees to look at better ways to use the conductor outside the locomotive in the right circumstances. The Federal Railroad Administration has examined whether crew size regulation is needed. The Obama administration and the Trump administration, under both those administrations, the rail safety experts concluded there isn't any evidence indicating that 2 people in the cab of a locomotive is safer than 1. So we respectfully ask that you vote no on this bill, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Questions for Mr. Jones? Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When was the last time there was a railroad strike in the state of Wyoming?
Mr. Jones.
Well, I do not know the answer to that. And I'm sure Sam Macedonio from BNSF Labor Relations may be able to speak to prior railroad strikes, but I don't know the answer.
And frankly, we're glad we don't know, because we wouldn't want any anytime soon, just to say, throw that in. Okay, any more questions for Mr. Jones? Very good, thank you very much. Okay, now, Mr. Winnie, introduce yourself, please, for the group.
Madam Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. Madam Chairman, I spent 30 years active duty in the Navy in the nuclear submarine world. I've served as a chief engineer on a nuclear sub. The care and feeding of that emergency diesel engine on that ship is about 600, 700 kW, was of real importance to us. I've also commanded 2 ships, one of them 8,700 tons, the other one rated at 18,000 tons. The 18,000 ton was diesel electric with 6 big propulsion diesels in it. I'd like to give the committee a little bit different perspective from what you've heard so far from everybody. In my view, the issue you're dealing with is there's 2 tasks that need to go on in the cab of a locomotive. One is a proper look at. You got to look down the road. You're talking 1,000-ton trains. And so they have to plan ahead. You can't stop on a dime like in your car. It takes miles sometimes to stop. One of the scariest things I ever had in my career as a commanding officer, my career passed in front of my eyes, was being alongside a pier when I let the pilot get my ship to get up to about 3/4 of a knot, and we couldn't stop. And I saw a collision coming. Fortunately, the thing that was preventing us from stopping got fixed and we got stopped. And so nothing particularly happened, but stopping something of that kind of tonnage is no small issue. And so the lookout has to be looking way down the road. The second task is operating the locomotive itself. That's a complex piece of machinery and even more complex in this modern computer world than it used to be. That takes a lot of detail looking at what's going on. And as I see it, those are the two things that you need to focus on and that drive how you would make your decision. So I would offer you the issue of operation of complex equipment combined with keeping a proper lookout are two tasks. And in my view, they are mutually exclusive. Subject to your questions. Thank you very much.
Questions for Ms. Winnie or Mr. Winnie? I beg your pardon. No questions for Mr. Winnie?
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for saving us a few minutes. Now we'll go back to somebody online. Donna, who's got their hand up next?
I will admit Nathan Anderson.
All right. I'm going to have to go to a second piece of paper for my notes. Mr. Anderson, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nathan Anderson. I represent Union Pacific Railroad, and I'm here to speak in opposition to House Bill 249. I'll do my very best not to reiterate things that my colleague, Mr. Jones, BNSF, already shared. My comments today will focus on how safety improvements are a function of implementing proven practices, procedures, techniques, and technologies, and then addressing changes to the work by the collective bargaining process. Much has been stated today already regarding this bill and railroad safety. Safety is Union Pacific's highest priority. And frankly, it's the goal of everyone in the room and on the Zoom. As a company, we continuously look for innovative approaches to enhance safety in every aspect of our business. Since the 80s, the 1980s, all key safety indicators show marked improvement, even as crew sizes have decreased. After nearly 160 years, Union Pacific can demonstrate that no correlation exists between crew size and safety improvements, none. We hear repeatedly that positive train control cannot address all safety concerns. That's why we have a suite or portfolio of safety solutions, including technology that make the rail industry a leader in employee safety nationally, even ahead of grocery stores. Neither the National Transportation Safety Board nor the Federal Railroad Administration, that agency tasked with promoting and regulating railroad safety, have any data to suggest that crew size is related to safety, nor has either organization seen fit to regulate the crew size. We've heard about removal of the caboose, elimination of the firemen, and other changes that have happened as railroads have moved from steam to diesel, and other changes have taken place. I want to take one step further back and illustrate how technological change impacts work requirements and railroading in general. In 1844, Elijah McCoy was born in Canada to parents who had fled slavery. During the Civil War, he attended college in Scotland and became a master mechanic and engineer. But upon returning to North America, he couldn't find work. That struggle was mostly due to racial barriers, and eventually he was hired by the Michigan Central Railroad. Now, at that time, trains had to stop every every few miles to have their moving parts oiled. And McCoy's job was to oil the axles and bearings. And as with many mechanical jobs at that day, it provided some degree of danger. McCoy considered automating that process and put his skills and knowledge as a mechanical engineer to work, inventing a lubricating cup that would change his job and made operating the railroad safer and more efficient as a result. His device, in fact, became so popular that other inventors tried to copy it, But the railroads and their employees would have none of that. They wanted the real McCoy. So chalk that phrase and over 50 patents up to Elijah McCoy's impact on our lives. Now, the 4014 big boy locomotive you see in my background was cutting edge technology in 1941 when it was delivered to Union Pacific. Its intent was to move freight over the Wasatch Mountains between Ogden, Utah and Green River, Wyoming. Now, today, that cutting edge technology is a beloved historical artifact that winters in Cheyenne and departs from here to tour communities along our network. New technology will continue to impact railroads and drive significant change across all modes of transportation at an increasing rate as far as we can see into the future. Now, we've heard testimony about getting rid of conductors and the problem of not having an extra set of eyes or no one to talk to. I want to give you an example of how those changes could look in the future based on what's currently being negotiated between labor and the railroads. So today, as you've heard, conductors are called from an unscheduled pool or board. They accompany an engineer in the cab and then walk the train to complete necessary work. They regularly travel away from home where they stay in hotels, as you've heard, and they await their next unscheduled call from the board. So what's being negotiated? Conductors would go on and off duty at a home terminal. This includes a scheduled shift, so you know what time you're going to work and you know what time you're coming back. The territory where you work would be defined, and you would receive at the beginning of your shift a lineup of trains and the work necessary to be done. The conductors would be in a truck, so they wouldn't have to walk the train. They could drive to the part of the train they need to address. They have a computer, tools, radio, supplies, and the flexibility to adapt to changing needs. We'll also sleep at home most nights, and we'll realize an enhanced work-life balance. These jobs would be coveted by employees seeking a more predictable work schedule and enhanced off-duty life. Of course, in some locations, due to geography or other constraints, a conductor will remain in the cab rather than be on the ground. In some cases, trains may take a conductor in the cab to a specified point where the conductor would switch to another train headed the opposite direction and return to their home terminal. Now, obviously, these plans would evolve over time as they're negotiated between those doing the work and the railroad. And those experts that understand what's necessary and why can negotiate those. But passing this bill would prevent those changes from being implemented in Wyoming. We recommend the state not force workers into positions that are unscheduled, unfriendly to families, and regularly require long hours away from home. The structure of this work should be left to those experts and the forces already in the industry, organized labor, multiple regulators, and the railroads who work every day in the business. In Wyoming, unions ratify collectively bargained agreements. Currently, those require 2 employees on a train. And as Mr. Jones eloquently said, that cannot change without mutual agreement by both parties. I encourage you to oppose House Bill 249, and I stand for any questions that if the chair will allow.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Questions for Mr. Anderson? And thank you for the history lesson about Mr. McCoy. That was quite interesting. Okay, thanks very much. All right, well, we have someone lined up already where I like this self-propelled. Go ahead, introduce yourself for the committee if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Kevin Reddy. I am the president of the, I'm the president of the Federated Firefighters of Wyoming. I represent the majority of the career firefighters across the state, and I'm currently a lieutenant here in Cheyenne with the Cheyenne firefighters. And if you're taking notes, Madam Chairman, I too am a resident of House District 7.
I'm aware. I have the best district in the state. It's full of knowledgeable and engaged people. Go ahead, Mr. Reddy.
Madam Chairman, we stand in strong support of the Railroad Safety Bill from a public safety standpoint. We've heard a lot of talk about how trains operate, how technology works, and safety standards work, et cetera. In our line of work, we show up when everything fails. Human error fails, judgment fails, and technology fails. Having responded to multiple incidents on railroads here in Cheyenne and our members all across the state, having industry experts who can operate the trains on those scenes is paramount to a successful outcome. Whether it's a fire in a locomotive, fire in the train cars themselves, medical emergencies in the boxcars or in the cabs, having somebody that is able to operate the equipment on scene increases our productivity from a public safety standpoint. As a former Representative Blake mentioned, there is a lot of extremely dangerous materials that on their own are somewhat innate, but when you combine them into an 18,000-foot train, all of a sudden we have a moving bomb through our communities. And that's where my profession comes in. So we strongly encourage you to support the bill.
Questions for Mr. Reddy? No? Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Hopefully you won't get called out a lot in the 36 inches of snow. Okay, let's see. Have we got Donna? Is there someone else who's next online?
Yes, I have Monica Leininger next. I'll admit her.
Okay. Ms. Leininger, then welcome. If you'll just introduce yourself for the committee.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Monica Leininger, speaking on behalf of Powder River Basin Resource Council and our members. For those of you that we haven't had the pleasure of meeting in person yet, our organization's founding members include family farmers and ranchers with historic roots in the Powder River Basin. And today we represent approximately 2,000 people from across the state that seek to sustain Wyoming's quality of life for current and future generations to come. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here in front of you today. Very quickly, our membership strongly and has strongly supported this bill. Railroads are an integral part of Wyoming's economy, infrastructure, and industries, and these railroads travel throughout the state on our farms, ranches, pristine landscapes, and communities. If these are already best practices being used within the industry, Wyoming should pass this legislation to make clear that we continue to hold high standards for the safe development and transportation of our natural resources. We ask the committee to move forward with this bill, and I'll stand before you with any questions. Thank you so much.
Questions for Ms. Leininger? No, none. All right, great. Thanks so much. Let's see. Anyone else from in the room wants to testify? Well, now see, I cut people off. I could have given everybody an extra minute and a half. Okay, then we'll just finish off online. Donna, who have we got next?
Okay, Charles Randolph.
Okay, let them in.
Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, everybody on the committee, Madam Chairman, honorable members of this committee. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we can't see you. Are you calling in by phone?
No, I'm calling in. I'm on the thing. I'll turn on my camera here. Hang on a second, please.
We just like to see everybody.
Well, I'm having a problem doing that. I don't know what the Zoom is here going on here. Let's see.
We'll imagine.
Okay, well, anyway, my name is Charles Randolph. I've had 39 years railroad experience, 37 years as a train dispatcher. My job here today is give you a different perspective. You've heard from railroaders, engineers, conductors, and such, but I'm a train dispatcher. I've had 22 years of dispatching trains along the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Front Range subdivision on a daily basis. That runs from Utah Junction out of Denver, Colorado to Casper, Wyoming through Cheyenne. I'm a native of Wyoming. I was born and raised in Cheyenne. My job primarily is to dispatch trains and work along the tracks. No track movements or work on the tracks can take place without the authority of the dispatcher. I control the territory that I worked. We're dark territory, we're non-signal territory. Everything I did was through written instructions called track warrants. I'm ready to take your questions.
Well, actually, I have a question before I do that. So I guess I don't, because I don't know that much about the railroad work. How does your position interact with what we've heard from the folks up in the locomotive or wherever they were.
Okay, basically, I can honestly say that if a train has a incident, and what I'm referring to is anytime it stops on a track or something goes wrong or there's an incident, I can almost guarantee you the first person that the train crew will contact is the train dispatcher. I dispatch trains from the NOC, National Operations Center in Fort Worth, Texas, for the time it was built in 1993. I did work out in McCook, Nebraska. That's where the dispatching area for this area was, in McCook for years before being moved to Texas, where they put all the dispatch together in a big, huge building down there in McCook called the National Operations Center. As I said before, my job is to dispatch trains, but also to schedule work on the tracks, get people out to fix things, broken rails, inspect bridges that were hit by trucks or whatever. And that's what I did. And like I said, I did my authority through track warrants. At first it was train orders, then I went to track warrants and then computerized track warrants. So I've really been involved in the technological changes that took place between 1979 when I started and 2016 when I retired.
Okay.
I can't say without it, I'm sorry, I
go
can't
ahead.
say without a doubt that what the trainmen and the engineers talked about is absolutely true. I have yet to figure out how we could not do it without two-man crews. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Randolph? So I do have one. So the presentation by and I don't remember if it was from the gentleman from UP or from Burlington Northern, but I suppose there might be similarities. If there were to be a shift to this sort of conductor kind of moving in shorter spaces, from home to a certain place and back again, rather than in extended trips, which is kind of what I understood. Do you think that sort of shift would speed up the response time to when you dispatch people in an incident?
Absolutely not, ma'am, because if you have an incident, you need to know information immediately. I've had, in my 37 years of train dispatching experience, I've had many, many derailments. And the conductor getting off the train or whoever going back and looking and finding out what was wrong, whether it's a minor thing like a broken air hose or major derailments, which I've had several. It is important that the information be done as quickly as possible with as much speed as possible so the proper authorities can be notified and emergency equipment can be sent to the site where they need to take care of business. For example, Representative Ottman talked about automation on the highway. Well, yes, there is automation on the highway. I do know that they've used driverless trucks to haul beer and stuff out of the Busch brewery, but I can tell you that truck weighs maybe 40 tons. Now, a train, one car alone can weigh up to 100 tons. And if that's propane, or as in the case like we like to transport through Cheyenne, molten sulfur, a derailment of that car could be serious. And we need to have people able to find out what's been derailed if it is involved in derailment immediately.
Very good.
It's been my experience that, automation is a good thing, but it's a two-edged sword. It works great when it works right, but it can be an ultimate disaster when it works wrong. We have, on my railroad that I dispatched, we had several automatic hot wheel detectors that would detect wheels that were getting too hot and had the possibility of failure. I got more false readings from those than I got positive readings for those. Now, you can't have an efficient railroad or you can't have a safe railroad when you're always looking up false information or false things like this. And a lot of times, if a second false indication was found on a hot wheel detector, you had to set that car out. but they've removed so many of the little short tracks that you can set cars out on. You might have to haul that car 20 miles before you can set it out. And that is a problem.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Randolph. I'm going to cut you off just so I think we have at least one other person and we want time to work the bill, but we appreciate all your work. Thanks very much. Okay.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Was there anybody else in the room that wanted to testify? Just checking. Okay, then Donna, I think we have one last person online.
That's correct. I have Sam Macedonio.
Okay,
who
send him
I'll
in.
Admit.
It's handy, committee. The list of the people signed up with if some of them have Burlington Northern or unionpacific.com addresses, helps me write down the names. Mr. Macedonia, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you guys. I'm going to try, Madam Chairman, to give you guys.
Yeah, can you speak a little closer to your mic or something, because we can't hear you.
Sure. Good
That's
morning.
better.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you this morning. Madam Chairman, I'm going to try to give you guys a little bit of history and answer some of the questions that were posed here today. The Railway Labor Act started in 1927, and it was started as a joint commission between labor and management to avert strikes and stop the interruption of transit throughout the United States. From the late 1800s to early 1920s, there were several strikes that resulted in bloodshed and impacted the U.S. economy. So when the two sides got together, they came up with the Railway Labor Act. The Railway Labor Act's been pretty successful since 1927 in avoiding strikes. There have been about 11 strikes since that time. I want to say the only one that really impacted Wyoming specifically that I know of was the one in the 40s, which was a joint strike between rail and coal workers. Since then, 11 have. The most recent strike was in 1991. And pursuant to the Railway Labor Act, when a strike does occur on the railway, Congress can step in and settle that dispute. And that's what they did in 1982. That's what they did in 1991, sending workers back to work after that strike occurred. So that's kind of the history on the strikes. As to this current bargaining session, we've been engaged since the end of 19 with the labor unions on negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement. That collective bargaining agreement does include an ask for one-person crews in certain circumstances. There are currently several railroads, including Amtrak, almost all of your past
you've just cut out
rails throughout the United States.
Mr. Macedonia, I'm sorry, we lost you about 2 minutes ago. You started to say several railroads, including Amtrak, and then we lost you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Several railroads, including Amtrak, most commuter lines, and several short lines throughout the United States do currently operate one person in the cab of the locomotive and have for decades. They have continued to be safe and will continue to be safe in the future. The railroads believe safety is number one. We would not endanger our employees, our communities, or anyone by trying to negotiate something that was unsafe. Some of my other colleagues mentioned, since the 70s, we have sat down with our unions across the table and gone from 5 to 3 and now to 2.
Oh, sorry, you
That
just
happened
locked
back
up
in
again.
1990.
I'm sorry, we heard 5 to 3 to 2, and then you cut out again.
Okay, I'm sorry. We went from 5 to 3 to 2 since the 1970s. And each time we sat down with our union partners and negotiated what that would look like. And neither the union nor management would negotiate something that would put anybody in danger or peril. Additionally, the FRA is the body, that's the federal government body that's in charge of safety or oversees safety for the railroads. And they have consistently come out and said that there has been no support that shows two-person crews are safer than one-person crews. Our current plan and proposal is not to eliminate the conductor. It's to redeploy that conductor so they can be actually more responsive to things like blocked crossings and incidents. Right now, you have a train that is a mile long. It takes over a mile for that train to stop, which would then cause the individual on the head end to walk back 2 miles. That could take upwards of 30 minutes to respond to an incident, when we believe that we could redeploy people on the ground to get to those places quicker, better, and be better equipped. So again, I would just reiterate everything my colleagues had said. This really is an issue of collective bargaining. We've successfully done that since the 70s on this issue. And we would ask that you guys refrain from passing legislature that would get in the way of that bargaining. I could take questions now.
Great. Questions for Mr. Macedonio? Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Macedonia, you just said, and I think you said that if something happens, you can get people on the ground there within 30 minutes. I'm not sure where you are, but thinking about Wyoming right now, we can't get anywhere in 30 minutes, honestly. So I am curious about that comment.
Mr. Macedonio.
Sure. So our current plan would be, obviously it's going to differ from state to state, and we are not going to, if there's a location, a gentleman spoke the other day, a little bit before me, about locations where the only time you can get somebody in there would be on another train that would come up behind it. In those instances, those would be instances we probably would not take the person off the train. So, I mean, there's many instances that we would look at, and characteristics of the rail, characteristics of what's being carried, and make safety decisions based on that. So, you know, just going to one person crew does not mean we will have one person on every train. Matter of fact, today we have the ability to operate several trains with 2 people, and we put a 3rd person on there because it makes that movement better, more efficient to move. So we would do that throughout our network.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Mr. Macedonio? No? Okay, great. Thanks for coming.
No,
Okay.
Thank you for being patient.
Donna, is there anybody else online?
No, Madam Chair, that's everyone. Oh, I do have Corey Runyon, who has already testified with his hand up to provide additional testimony.
I can give him about 2 minutes.
I'll admit him.
Mr. Runyon, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to state, I disagree with a couple of things there. In the past, when we've had negotiations through the Railway Labor Act, we typically, when there's a disagreement, it goes to mediation. And then if we can't come to an agreement there's a cooling off period. And then it goes to a presidential emergency board that a president could decide they would let us use self-help and go on strike. Typically, they do not, because it's detrimental to the economy. So he would provide a presidential emergency board, and he would pick those people. There are no rules to how the president picks the people to oversee that. We would be stuck with that agreement. If we did not like it at that point and disagree with it, then it would go to Congress. And it was Congress who decided, to some of those agreements where we lost people, and then also made them unprotected, where they said we could not protect the unborn yet, the new employee. And so those new employees worked under a different rules. It was not the union that said, okay, we didn't really have a choice. Congress decided that. And then as far as the relation to safety goes, I can give you a couple different accidents. There was Lee Magnique that was in Canada. That is not going to be in their statistics. Another one is Chatsworth, California, where an Amtrak ran into a freight train and the engineer was texting. Now, we don't look at our phones anymore and we do not use them, but I would like to think if there was another person in that cab with that engineer, they would have looked at him and said, are you going to stop? What are you doing? Another instance is in Philadelphia.
Mr. Runyon, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off because that was your 2 minutes.
Okay.
But feel free to email us more information, certainly, as we
Thank you.
consider what to do with Bill. Thank you very much. Okay.
Madam Chair, we
Yes.
also have Charles Randolph, who would like to provide additional testimony.
Okay. 1 minute.
Again, I'd like to ask, I'd really like to hear from the officials how a train disabled at McDonald's Crossing, which is a crossing approximately 6 miles west of Chugwater, Wyoming, how they would get a person, what they call a traveling conductor or a traveling conductor to that area in a snowstorm that we're expected like this weekend, and fix a disabled train when they get there in a snowstorm. That crew would be out there for probably a couple days. Roads would be blocked with snow drifts and various things like that. And if we had an emergency at the Schroeder farm right there, how would they be able to get help if they needed it with their crossing blocked with the train? Thank you. That's
Okay.
all I have to say.
Good, Mr. Randolph, we won't have time to find out the answer right now because we're going to close public testimony. Okay, public testimony being closed. Is there a motion on the bill? Moved by Connolly. Is there a second? Seconded by Romero Martinez. Is there any discussion on the bill?
Madam Chair.
Representative Connolly.
Madam Chair, especially for new folks on the committee, this is a bill that we heard last year and we passed it out of our chamber 4118. It was over 2/3 of the body after a comparable kind of discussion and debate. Regrettably, the other chamber just sat on it. And so I would hope that we could pass it again this year and move it over and do some work on the Senate side. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the bill?
Madam Chair, I know
Representative Worf.
we're limited on time, so I'm going to be quick, but normally this is something that I probably would not want to weigh in on. But I do think after hearing testimony, the last strike we had was in 1991. And I do feel as though it appears that the scale of justice has the federal government pushing down on one side. And I do think for safety, we've been told that there's no plan right now to go to single person crews yet. But I think in our state, just the remoteness of our state, and I can guarantee this committee that the hazardous material that goes through our communities is very tremendous. And so I would urge the body or this committee to vote this out, and let's have it discussed on the floor. So Madam Chair, that's my comment.
Okay, any last comments? Okay, Bonnie, would you call the roll, please?
Representatives Clifford. Connolly.
Aye.
Flitner.
No.
Hallinan.
No.
Ottman. Martinez.
Aye.
Stivar.
Conflict.
Worf.
Aye.
Madam Chairman.
Well, I'll just say, I would like to vote no, but I'll vote aye to get it out on the floor because that's the way the vote falls. But I'm
Madam,
going to vote against it no on the floor.
Madam Chairman, we have 5 ayes, 3 noes, and 1 conflict. The
Okay.
conflict being Representative Stivar and the noes being Representatives Flitner, Hallinan, and Ottman.
Okay,
Okay.
meeting is adjourned. Committee, remember on Monday, actually, I'm going to set the meeting for 7:30 because we've got 4 bills before us. We'll have the specific order out later today. And be prepared. Make sure you take your laptop home in case you get snowed home and you have to call in. Yep. Right. Right. Very good. Okay, meeting's adjourned. See you all upstairs.
And to the-